One of the things that we saw that I touched upon in my opening remarks was how Europe has had to react to the Russian invasion of Ukraine with regard to their energy. My understanding is in the years prior to this invasion that U.S. officials have been warning Europe about their over-reliance on Russian energy and what that could mean if there was a crisis, and by and large were dismissed as almost being laughed out of the room, but just saying that's not going to be a problem, it's never going to happen. But then, of course, we have seen that it has happened, and it is, as I mentioned earlier, caught them off guard, and they've had to scramble to be able to realign their energy mix of where it's coming from. And this just kind of demonstrates kind of the foot dragging that has been gone in Europe, also with regard to the People's Republic of China. Obviously, Ursula von der Leyen's speech was very good. It looked to start getting away from this methodology of calling the PRC partner, competitor, rival, and talked about de-risking. And at the TTC summit, Swedish Prime Minister Kristersson said, I think the U.S. has been a few years ahead of Europe, but I think very many countries now realize this is not the time for naivety. So I think that there's movement there, but the question gets back to the matter of timing. The PRC has been increasingly hostile and aggressive in its rhetoric toward Taiwan. We just saw this past week where a PRC destroyer had a very close call with an American ship, obviously on purpose, being very aggressive in its maneuvers. And so my question is, how fast is this moving? If this is a 5, 10, 15-year thing with regard to the European Union and how we deter the PRC, my fear is that will be too late, that the PRC will move faster than that to get to Taiwan. So, Dr. Ertl, maybe I'll start with you. How do European leaders see this? I mean, do you think this is something with regard specifically about deterring the PRC in Taiwan? Is this something that they are talking about? And actually, maybe ask you to comment a little bit, because you said you hadn't seen these types of debates before. Was that specifically with regard to the PRC, or just broadly you hadn't seen this kind of debate before? But how do European leaders see that? Is this something where they think, yeah, we've got to take steps right now, or are they still thinking this is a years down the road problem?
So Taiwan has become an issue that has moved on the agenda, and I was referring specifically to Taiwan as a topic, as a discussion that I haven't seen in that way before in the last 15 years, because it has moved so fast. The problem was so far away for European leaders for such a long time, but particularly the reliance on semiconductors, particularly the reliance on trade routes, particularly the integration of supply chains has led European leaders to understand, and I think Noah's colleagues at Rhodium Group have added to that with a fantastic report that has put some numbers to this. When you give European politicians the actual cost of a crisis, that does change the logic a little bit. So we are having now very substantive conversations at all levels in the member states. But there is a capacity gap in some member states because it's just really difficult to be on top of all of these different matters. There is an urgency gap in some member states, but there is certainly a conversation at the EU level that is very interesting at the moment, and I think where a lot of the action will be happening in the future. But real action, it is very unlikely to see something committed to see before something really happens. So I think it is more interesting now to sound out the gray lines, the gray zones, to sound out policy responses to kind of more limited incursions, questions of more kind of what would certain scenarios mean in terms of cost to the European economy, and then to drive this message home at home, because I think the data that I've presented in terms of our public opinion reviews, I would say, if you have 62% that want to stay neutral in a scenario where neutrality is not an option, as a politician you have a job to do of explaining why neutrality is not an option, and then explaining how you will manage the issue and what the expectation level of the regional countries will be.
But Dr. Ertl, it sounds like what you're telling me about European leaders generally speaking is they're starting to move, but they're not to the point where they can even make the case then to their respective populations about trying to deter the PRC in Taiwan right now, because they're still not quite there themselves. Is that fair?
I think they have started to make that case, but I think this is a long process, because this is really not an immediate security threat that has been on the agenda of policymakers for a long time. So I would say it's moving pretty fast for EU speed, which is not always the fastest, but I don't think it's a 5 or 10 year framework that we're looking at, but more like the next year is going to be a year of intense discussions around this issue.
Okay, then great. So let me just follow up with regard to the respective public opinion on this, because you gave some stats on that. Mm-hmm. And how quickly did that move after the invasion of Ukraine? And what role can the United States play in helping bring those populations along to be able to understand the threat? You know, for example, if there was a conflict in the Taiwan Straits, that's 30% of the world's trade. That's going to impact Europe. I'm guessing a lot of Europeans don't necessarily know that. I'm sure a lot of Americans don't know it. So how fast did it move in Ukraine, and what can we as the United States do to help with that?
It moved immediately after Ukraine, and I think what we have also seen is that some things that take forever normally don't take very long then under circumstances like that. If I remind you of the LNG terminals in Germany, which everyone told us was going to take 8 years and it took 8 months to build them, things can move very quickly in a situation of crisis. And I think this is what the EU has demonstrated and European countries have demonstrated, that they are able to swing around when the crisis is real. Now, I think what a lot of people in the expert circles are advocating for is that the cost of this swing is a lot lower when you start a little bit earlier. So I think this is the zone that we're in right now, to ask the question between how imminent is the problem and how likely is it to come. And I think this is where the debates are heading at the moment, because, of course, if you regard a problem as very imminent, then you will take different policy options as if you think it will not happen in the next 5 years, so we will do certain other things first. If you are in a situation of crisis, which you always have to remind, everyone of, Europe is in a crisis situation at the moment, like it hasn't been, as you said, basically since World War II. So there are priority questions right now, prioritization questions at the moment going on, and this is one of them. And I think movement is possible pretty fast, and I think the United States can help by making the case and providing data on what the cost, for example, would be. I think this is really important to underscore and underline how important, how kind of we can come to good trade data, to good figures on what this would mean.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that European leaders would be wise to do is read what Xi Jinping is saying, because they've made very clear that bringing Taiwan back into the PRC's fold is an existential threat to the Chinese Communist Party, which means they have said there is no room for compromise on this. So the timing obviously is still up in the air, but the imminency of it, the certainty of it, is something that the PRC has no doubt about, that they are going to do this at some point, whether it's peaceful or through armed means. They believe they will do this.
Let's say there's a real reckoning going on about what authoritarian leaders say and what they actually mean, and that we should take that very seriously, which I think is a lesson that was learned the hard way over the last 18 months in Europe.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ricketts. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding a hearing on this.